You weren't there that morning by the lake, when the wind carried the sound of rippling water and the soft shuffle of ducks on the bank. But if you'd been, you'd never forget what happened next. A quiet woman, barely in her late 20s, stood by the water's edge with a small bag of grain in her hands. Her name was Elena Ward, though no one in town really knew that. To them, she was just the kind stranger who fed the ducks every weekend, who smiled at old men fishing, who sometimes sat for hours staring at the horizon as if waiting for something or someone. If you agree that real heroes never truly stop serving, make sure to like and subscribe, because what happened that morning changed everything the town thought they knew about her. The day began with sunlight so bright it painted gold across the pond, the kind of morning that made people believe the world was still gentle. Kids laughed by the water, their hands full of breadcrumbs, and their mothers washed with half-hearted scolds, pretending not to smile. The air smelled of damp grass and fresh coffee from the cafe across the street. Elena poured grain into her palm, scattering it in arcs that glimmered before hitting the water. Her sleeves were rolled up, and a simple silver bracelet caught the light every time she moved. To the untrained eye, she looked like peace itself, calm, ordinary, perhaps even fragile. But peace is a strange disguise. It hides the stories written in scars no one ever sees. A couple nearby whispered about her, as they often did. "She's so quiet," the woman said softly. "Always alone. I think she works at the bookstore." Her husband shrugged. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe she's just one of those people who like silence." They couldn't know that silence was the only thing that didn't scream at her. Then came the static. A faint, electric hum that sliced through the morning sounds, so subtle at first that even she thought it was her imagination. The children didn't notice, still throwing crumbs, but Elena froze. Her hand stopped mid-motion, grain spilling through her fingers. The hum grew sharper. Then a voice, faint but unmistakable, came through. "Captain Ward, this is command. You're needed at HQ, Priority 1. The words hung in the air like a gunshot that no one fired. Every head turned. The mother closest to her blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. The boy holding a piece of bread looked up, mouth open. "Captain?" he asked, his small voice cutting through the hush. Elena didn't answer. She just stared at the rippling water, as if it could swallow the past rising behind her eyes. It had been 3 years since she'd heard that tone, the clipped urgency, the kind of voice that doesn't ask, only commands. 3 years since she'd walked away from the life that took everything and left her with nothing but the nightmares. She'd sworn she'd never respond again. But as the comm's light pulsed faint blue against her wrist, the sound of ducks faded into the distance, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Around her, confusion thickened. A man on the bench nearby lowered his newspaper. A teenager filming the ducks with his phone caught the moment by accident, his camera trembling as he zoomed in on her. No one spoke, but everyone stared. The air felt charged, like the moments before a storm, still, heavy, expectant. Elena's jaw tightened. Slowly, she pushed the comm beneath her sleeve, silencing it. But even in the silence, the echo of those words, "Captain Ward, you're needed," kept replaying in her mind. Her heart thudded once, slow and deliberate, like an engine restarting after years of rust. She'd buried that part of her life beneath layers of ordinary. But the call had found her anyway. She took a deep breath and looked around. The world hadn't changed. The ducks were still circling, the sunlight still dancing on the pond, but everyone's eyes were on her now. That harmless, quiet girl by the water had become someone else entirely in their minds. A soldier, a secret, a story they didn't understand. The mother who'd been standing nearest stepped closer. Did that just say captain?" she asked, half whispering, as if afraid of the answer. Elena turned to her and smiled softly, the kind of smile that said everything and nothing at once. "Just an old habit," she replied, voice calm, steady. But her eyes told a different truth, the kind you couldn't fake. The kind that came from nights spent under sirens and skies that burned red. She crouched, pouring the rest of the grain into the little boy's hands. "Here," she said. "They like it better when you throw it close to the water." The boy nodded uncertainly, his wide eyes reflecting her own unease. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked. Elena paused for just a second, the faintest crack in her composure. Then she nodded. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Just for a while." As she rose, the sleeve of her jacket shifted, revealing a faint tattoo near her wrist, a small emblem, almost faded, a winged insignia surrounded by coordinates. The teenage boy filming caught it clearly. Later, it would circulate online with captions like "The mysterious woman by the lake, a soldier?" But in that moment, it was only hers, and the air carried the quiet weight of recognition. Elena turned toward the path leading back to town. Each step she took felt heavier, as if the ground itself remembered her boots from another lifetime. People whispered, eyes following her, but she didn't look back. There was a part of her that wanted to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't heard, to let that call fade into static like a bad dream. But another part, the part that had led convoys through fire, that had patched wounds under mortar light, that had buried brothers and saluted flags, that part wouldn't let her ignore it. The sound of a church bell carried across the lake, solemn and low. She stopped, staring at the reflection of herself in the water. The woman who looked back wasn't the same one who'd arrived in this town years ago. That version of her had tried to heal. This one was remembering. Behind her, the boy's voice rose again, innocent and curious. "Why did it call you Captain?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said enough. And for the first time in years, Elena Ward felt the stillness inside her shift. The peace she'd built wasn't real, just a quiet held together by distance and denial. But now, the call had reached her, cutting through all the layers she'd wrapped around herself. She turned toward the parking lot, where an old black motorbike sat under a tree, dusted with leaves. She'd kept it, just in case, though she'd never admitted why. Maybe some part of her always knew peace was temporary. Maybe she knew that once you've carried the weight of command, it never really leaves your shoulders. As she reached for her helmet, she glanced back one last time. The lake shimmered, the ducks still drifting, the world still pretending to be ordinary. But in that moment, she knew she couldn't pretend anymore. The comm blinked again, blue and insistent. "Captain Ward, acknowledge. Priority 1. She slid the visor down. The hum of the engine broke the silence. And though no one there would understand it, every whisper, every stare, every question would fade beneath that sound. The sound of a soldier remembering who she really was. The road stretched ahead of her like a memory she didn't want to follow, long, cracked, and familiar in all the wrong ways. Elena's motorbike tore down the countryside road, its low hum swallowed by the wind. The town she'd called home shrank in the mirrors, replaced by rolling fields and the faint silhouettes of power lines leading nowhere. She hadn't worn the jacket in years, the dark tactical one folded away in a box under her bed. But this morning, when the call came, she knew exactly where it was. The weight of it on her shoulders felt like armor, heavier than it should have been, but right. Her mind replayed the words that dragged her back. "Captain Ward, you're needed at HQ." Command voices always sounded detached, mechanical, stripped of humanity. But beneath the formality, she'd heard something she hadn't in years: panic. HQ never panicked. Not unless something was wrong, really wrong. The sun climbed higher, cutting through the mist that still clung to the valley. As she rode, fragments of the past surfaced without permission. A metal corridor slick with oil, a voice yelling medic down, a pair of shaking hands pressed to a wound that wouldn't close. The kind of memories that don't fade, they just wait for silence to return. She'd left that world behind 3 years ago, after the explosion at Station Delta took half her unit. They'd called it collateral. She called it enough. She'd walked away, turned in her credentials, and disappeared into quiet towns and nameless mornings, where no one asked what the stars tattooed on her shoulder meant. But even peace has cracks. Every time she looked up at the night sky, she counted them. Every time a door slammed too hard, she flinched. Every time a siren passed, her heart stuttered in rhythm. That part of her, the soldier, never retired. It only slept. Now it was awake again. By the time she reached the old checkpoint road, the world around her had changed. A faint haze hung over the horizon. Smoke, or maybe dust, but it shimmered like heat. The checkpoint gates were still there, paint peeling, the once gleaming sign of Sector Command 12 faded to ghost letters. 2 young sentries stood guard, barely out of their teens, rifles slung across nervous shoulders. They straightened instantly when they saw her approach. One of them, the shorter of the two, frowned uncertainly. "Ma'am, this area's restricted." Then his eyes widened as her ID flashed on the bike's panel. "Captain, Elena Ward, Rhett. The taller soldier stammered. See Captain Ward? Ma'am, we thought you were gone. She finished for him, cutting the engine. So did I. They exchanged uneasy glances. Whatever was happening inside, it wasn't routine. The smell of burning circuits drifted faintly through the air, and somewhere beyond the gates came the rhythmic pulse of sirens. HQ requested your presence immediately, ma'am, the short one said, voice trembling slightly. They said it was critical containment. Elena's jaw tightened. Containment. That word had followed her through her entire service. It never meant good news. She gave a small nod, scanning the horizon where the base walls shimmered under the heat. Open the gate, she said. As they did, she took a deep breath, the kind that hurts your chest because it feels too heavy to finish. She remembered the day she left, saluting the same emblem that now flapped weakly over the compound. She'd promised herself never to return, but promises, she was learning, were just words until the world tested them. The motorbike rolled through the open gate, and the sentries watched as she disappeared beyond the barricade. None of them spoke for a long time. They didn't have to. Even from where they stood, they could feel it, the air shifting, the kind of silence that comes before something big. Inside the base, sirens wailed once, then cut out abruptly. Elena slowed the bike, scanning the perimeter. Vehicles were overturned. Glass littered the ground. The air tasted metallic. Something had happened here, something sudden, and as she pulled off her helmet and stared at the chaos unfolding ahead, the words came back again, echoing faintly through the comm in her ear, a voice she hadn't heard since before the war ended. Welcome back, Captain. We weren't sure you'd answer. Her pulse quickened. For the first time in years, she wished she hadn't. The main hangar loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the pale sky. What used to be a symbol of order was now scarred and hollow, its steel doors hanging uneven on their hinges. Elena parked the bike beside an overturned Jeep, stepping into the quiet hum of a facility that once pulsed with life. The air carried the faint stench of burnt metal and disinfectant, the mix of chaos and cleanup. She moved carefully, eyes scanning every corner, boots crunching over shattered glass and fragments of data pads. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered in stuttering rhythms, throwing shadows across the walls where old insignias still clung to the paint, her insignias. For a heartbeat, she saw herself years ago, younger, sharper, standing in this same corridor shouting orders to a squad who trusted her with their lives. They'd called her Iron Captain then, not for her strength, but for the way she never broke, even when the sky did. But the woman walking these halls now wasn't made of iron anymore. She was human again, scarred and soft in ways no one saw. Yet as she turned the final corner and saw the operations deck, something inside her clicked back into place. Dozens of monitors flickered, showing feeds from across the compound. Systems failing, blackout, zones blinking red. Technicians worked frantically, their faces pale in the cold glow of the screens. In the center stood General Rios, her old commander, older now, his hair more gray than dark. When he saw her, his jaw tightened, not in surprise, but in relief. Elena, he said quietly. You came. She folded her arms, her tone even but edged. You called a retired officer on a Priority 1 channel. You don't do that unless the world's burning. It might be, Rios replied. He handed her a data slate, its surface cracked but still functional. The feed showed something beyond the perimeter, a dark plume rising from the hills, a signal beacon flashing an impossible sequence. That's not ours, Elena said, eyes narrowing. No, he agreed. But whoever triggered it used your authorization code. She stared at him. That's not possible. That code was decommissioned when I left. Apparently, someone kept your ghost alive in the system, he said. And now that ghost just woke something we thought was buried forever. The words hit harder than the cold air around them. Elena scrolled through the data, her heart sinking as she saw the coordinates. It wasn't just any site. It was the ruins of Delta, the outpost where she'd lost her team. The one she'd sworn never to return to. So that's what this is, she murmured. Someone's trying to drag up the past. Or finish what was started, Rios said softly. And I need the only person who knows what really happened there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of dying machines filled the silence. She looked down at her hands, steady, calloused, still marked by a faint line where a ring used to be. That old ache rose again, the weight of every decision she'd buried. Finally, she exhaled. "All right," she said. "One last time." Rios nodded, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "You'll have what you need. Transport, clearance, whatever's left of the old unit." She shook her head. "No unit," she said quietly. "Just me." She turned toward the exit, the sunlight bleeding through the shattered glass, cutting across her face. For a moment, she let herself look back at the broken hangar, the fading emblems, the ghosts that waited in every corridor. This was where she'd learned what courage really cost. And maybe, she thought, courage wasn't about walking away from the past. Maybe it was about walking back into it, eyes open, knowing what it would take. Outside, the horizon shimmered with smoke and distance. She adjusted her gloves, started the bike, and the engine growled to life, low and familiar. Somewhere beyond those hills was the truth she'd spent years running from. As the gates opened and the wind hit her face, she whispered under her breath, not to anyone, but to the echoes that still followed her. "Let's finish this." The bike shot forward, disappearing into the rising dust. Behind her, the base fell silent again, but for those who saw her ride out, one thought lingered. The woman who once fed ducks by the lake was gone. The captain had come home,